guide to businesses.
Brilliant. Good afternoon. The Sustainability TV programme is here again today. Just a quick one today. We've got half an hour to chat to you about the utilisation of energy. And we might as well start where Tim and I were just chatting before we came on about the use of waste food and garden materials for methane digestion. You were saying, Tim, that you think that the supermarkets are now considering doing this themselves.
Yeah, Sainsbury's had a scheme that they set up earlier on in the year where they use all of the food waste they generate, they send it off to a biodigester, it gets converted into gas, which they then sell into the national grid. They're using that to cut down on their electricity bills. I mean, of course, all of the food retailers are looking at the same kind of schemes now. I guess it's a way. I mean, it's one of these problems I have in sustainability terms because it's not directly generating the electricity they use. So it's, in a sense, they're putting spare gas into the electricity grid and getting money back in exchange for it, then buying electricity later on. So in sustainability terms, it doesn't mean that they're off-grid, as it were. They still depend on all of the generation from gas and coal and all the rest of it to keep it going. So it's a step along the road, but it's not a cure-all.
No, but I can't help thinking that the more of these things that we do, the better, because I can't help thinking that the reality is it's got to be lots of little things. If we're all going to get involved, then it's going to be lots of smaller projects.
Yeah, I'm sure it's insofar as you're generating food waste, there's a limit to what you can do with it. I mean, nowadays, if you try putting food waste or anything really in landfill, you're paying a large, whether it's a tax or a fine, but I mean, there are all kinds of disincentives to landfill. So your options with food waste are going to be composting it or biodigestion. Now, that said, I mean, a lot of the supermarkets now will they produce food that's sort of past its best, which they'll now hand on. There are cafes up and down the country now that use the sort of end-of-the-line food from the supermarkets, and they'll work on a donation basis. So essentially, it's a way around the sort of food and health laws that would say that you're not allowed to sell food from stuff that's past its best. But what you can do is give it away. So essentially, you've got cafes now up and down the country that will give away the food in exchange for a donation.
I'm not quite sure. Some of the homeless trust type groups utilise that as well, or are they not able to do that?
That's the idea. So I mean, generally, a lot of them will do, you pay whatever you can afford. So the hope is that people that can afford to pay for a meal will go and pay the full whack. And effectively, that's allowing the homeless guy that comes in to have his meal for free. Which is, again, a very good way of dealing with food that otherwise is going to end up being thrown out.
Yes, it's definitely a coffee shop in Watford, a Reason Cafe, that does a pay it forward option. I don't think he does food particularly, or he does some small things like cakes and a sandwich maybe, but certainly coffee. So if you go in and you're willing to pay, which I quite often do, put the extra couple of quid in the pot, that sort of pay it forward thing, and that anybody who is in need of it can come and have whatever they need.
Yes, I mean, those are your outlets for waste food. Really, is stuff that you can that's still edible. It's just starting to can go out to that kind of cafe. Everything that's past.
Because I do at home. I don't know about you, but get the apples that are going a little bit soft in the bowl. You cook them up and make them into an apple crumble or something, don't you? So I can see that's going to be an opportunity other people could make up.
Yeah, I generate very little food waste. So we've got the small food caddy for putting out for the council for food waste. I think I do one of those every 3 weeks, and the majority of what's in there is tea bags. So in terms of actual food waste, I generate very little.
I'd say probably I do generate quite a bit, but then I cook a lot, and well, I suppose in the autumn in particular, because I'll take on, I'll go around and collect up all the windfall apples and stuff, and all the sorts of things that either other people can't use, or I can pick for free. And there is quite a bit of waste from it, although I have to say, a lot of that goes on my own wormery stroke compost. But yeah, I suppose I've been waiting for my worms to really get going so I can feed them it all, but which they probably can now, or certainly will next spring. That they were a bit slow getting up and going. I didn't start until late in the year, so.
Yeah, I think we were saying before we came on that the amount of food that we as a nation are wasting now is only a third of what we were wasting back before the recession. So I think as money's a bit tighter for everyone, people are, well, I mean, part of that is the decisions that people are making about what to eat. So I suspect there's a bit more, they're still selling lots of junk food, but I suspect we're cutting down more as a nation on the junk food side and going back to more raw ingredients, which then tend not to produce the waste.
Yes, I suppose so, although I would say if you cook from fresh, you probably are generating more waste because you're peeling and coring and what have you. But perhaps, I don't know, perhaps it's more a case of just not buying things that we're not going to eat. And just
I guess.
feel like we want, what was something I had a bit more of a decision to make about, I suppose. I used to buy too much in essence, and because I didn't know what I would have, and so that I'd have quite a few options. But then if we hadn't eaten up, whatever meat within a couple of days, and I knew that we'd only got another day, I would then either cook it or pop it in the freezer and get it out and cook another day. I wouldn't necessarily throw it out, where some people do buy these things that are so-called ready-made, and they have a sell-by date on, and people will tend to toss them out if they think they've gone past. But there you go. But I think it's a good thing that we're not wasting so much. That's definitely good, albeit that may be down to the fact that we're being a bit more cautious with our funding. That's perhaps not quite so good.
Well, I mean, in a way, it helps you focus. So if for financial reasons, more and more of us are not buying stuff that ends up going rotten in the back of the fridge or in the back of the cupboard, then that's a good thing in itself. The problem, I think, for the big food retailers longer term is once we've got into that habit, they may find it difficult for us to break the habit, because clearly they want to sell us more and more ready meals.
Yes, definitely. Their requirements are different from the best of the world's requirements. If we buy more than we need and we chuck a load out, that's fine. They've made a profit.
Yes, and that ultimately is the problem with this growth perspective that we're in, that everything has to grow. And in order to grow, you have to keep using more and more of the Earth's resources and give back ever less and less. Ultimately that's impossible to do on a finite planet.
Yes, we're still growing in our population though, aren't we? Which is not a great thing.
Well, population-wise, and you don't hear politicians saying that they want to set up a sustainable system. Even the Green Party talk about, we need to grow the economy. So you end up having to ask, well, how are you going to square growing the economy with not doing further damage to the environment? As I don't know a way of doing it. I think it's very wishful thinking.
Yes, it's still a tough one, isn't it? Because there's still a mentality of I can do better than you, and the only way I can prove that is to have more than you have, and therefore if I've got more than you have, I can show that I'm better than you, or I have done better than you, I've achieved more than you. And if that is the end game, so that therefore if I've done better than you, I can get the best girlfriend or the best boyfriend or whatever it is, I want, or the biggest house or whatever, then in order to be able to achieve that, you keep having to get more and more and more. You have to accumulate more and more funds, even though you don't need it, way, way, way beyond what you need. So we need some other form of competition, I think, something else that will set us apart.
Yeah, I mean, we need to do things very differently. And my own view is it goes back to the way money is created, because we create money with debt. So, I mean, if government spends money, it borrows it. So it's borrowed into existence. Now, the problem with anything debt-based is it has interest on it. That, by definition, means that you have to somehow generate more wealth at the end than you had at the beginning.
Yes.
So as long as we have debt-based money, and we've had it for the best part of 500 years, as long as you have that system, then you're always going to have to go out and keep destroying the planet. The problem with it is because if you like, you have to keep generating wealth. Wealth being that you take the resources of the planet and make them into things. Now, it's on that basis that a lot of us can work in services, because, lots of us do things that don't have a physical product that we make. But we're only able to do that because people that make things are producing enough wealth to fund the services. There's this myth that we can all basically do lots of creative things on the internet and all sell to each other. But in the way we're living with a debt-based way of doing things, if somebody isn't manufacturing and making things, then it all collapses. So the solution to it ultimately is that you switch the way money is created around. So that in effect, you need to create money after somebody has produced something that we consider to be of value. And that doesn't have to be a wealth thing. It doesn't have to involve destroying the planet. So if you like, for example, if we said, well, we'll generate money on the basis of every homeless person that we get into a house or into their home. So every time that happens, we'll produce some extra money. So then if people want money, they've got to make sure the homeless guy gets housed.
Until there are no homeless lives.
Yeah. But,
totally.
Okay, that's just an example. But if you went into, what do we consider to be wealth as a society rather than just raping the planet? Let's add up all of the things that we think are useful that don't damage the environment and create money from those rather than just borrowing it into existence from banks who are then going to charge interest on it. And all of us are locked into that. So if you have a pension, if you have savings, if you're depending on your house being worth more in a year's time than it is now, then you are invested in a system that by definition has to keep destroying the planet, because all of us are relying on things growing. So if you like, the point to me is we're getting to the stage where that debt-based way of doing things cannot work anymore.
So what you're saying is we would then either have to create more food or more goods in order to create some wealth in the first place, or that's what we're doing at the moment?
At the moment, what we're doing is we create currency, literally out of thin air. It's just somebody types something into a bank account computer and that's new money. But it comes with compound interest. So say not only are you going to borrow that money for whatever you want to use it for, but you're also then going to pay it back with the interest. So you've somehow...
The actual existence or the creation of it, you're saying?
Well, essentially, it is fraud, essentially. But somebody is effectively renting us our money rather than, it used to be that the government printed it and it belonged to us. Now it's being rented to us. So all of us are having to pay rent just to use the money that we use. And none of us can do business without money.
Not yet, no.
So then the problem is, well, when I go into the bank, I mean, if I sort of say, well, look, I want to borrow, say, £20,000, they're going to say, well, what do you want £20,000 for? So I might say, well, look, I need to look after my elderly mother who's at the end of her life and she needs a bit more extra care, and I need the money just to tide myself over while I'm doing that. So they're going to say, well, can we see your business plan and can we see how you're going to pay us back with interest? Because I'm going to say, well, I can't pay back with interest because there's no money to be made from looking after my mother. So, okay, at that point, they show you out of the door. Now, if you go back in and say, hey, right, I'd like to borrow £1 million, please. And they're right, what's it for? And you say, well, I'd like to set up a care home for the elderly. And I'm going to get a contract with the local council. I'm going to employ people on 0 hours contract on the minimum wage. I'm going to make as much money out of these people as I can. And at the end of 10 years, I'll be able to pay you your $1 million back with interest. And I'll have made a load of money and I'll sell the business on to somebody at the end. And of course, at that point, they'll bend over backwards to give me the money. So essentially, the first thing that you wanted to do, which is something positively social, you couldn't get a bank to lend that money into existence for you on that basis. Go in and say, I'm going to do something antisocial. I mean, I'm effectively going to put all of these old people in a warehouse somewhere and give them the minimum amount of care I can get away with, delivered by people who really don't want to be there, who are on appalling working conditions, and that they will fund readily. The other example that I use in my book is I could go and say, look, government is trying to privatize all of the forests. So I'd like to borrow £1 million to buy up a forest or a piece of forest. So again, they're going to ask, well, what do you want the money for? I'd say, well, it's a natural resource. It's something that belongs to humanity. I'm going to use the money just to make sure nobody destroys it. And again, they're going to ask me, well, how are you going to pay the money back with interest? Because I can't. If I mean, the next person through the door behind me says, well, I'd like to buy this, borrow the same £1 million to buy the same bit of forest. Right, how are you going to do it? Well, I'm going to take a bulldozer or some chainsaws in there. I'm going to cut it down. I'm going to sell the trees for timber. I'm going to level the ground. I'm going to build houses on it. And again, they're going to say, yes, here's your money, off you go. Very nice to do business with you.
Yes.
So
very frequently that kind of thing happens, unfortunately.
Yeah, so we have a system that is inherently set up to do that. So the things that we would look at and say, well, we value keeping the forests pristine and looking after the environment. It's actually nigh on impossible to borrow money against those kind of activities. Whereas if you do something that's extractive, that destroys, that kind of chops things down or digs things up, all of those extractions that we've been doing for hundreds of years, that is readily lent against. Now, the problem we've got to, of course, is there's a limit now to how that we can't keep doing it. Quite simply, the planet is not going to let us do another exponential round of borrowing. Whether we choose to or our politicians choose to do it or not. I mean, the fact of the matter is we now have so much outstanding debt that the planet cannot provide the wealth needed to pay it back. So on that basis, I mean, anyone that's got numbers on their account in a bank, anyone that's got a paper certificate saying they own something, actually has nothing. Because it's going to go away.
Apart from your house, perhaps.
Well, yes, I mean, you'll keep your house, and if you bought your house to live in it, then you'll be fine. If you've bought your house with a view to selling it on for a profit later on, then you're going to be in trouble. Because I think when all of the money goes away, then all of the value behind the houses will go as well. Well, I mean, if we go to a point where nobody's got any money, then I mean, in the end, a house is worth what a house is worth. So, I mean, if you added it up, building materials, the sort of cost of the fuel for the machines, the people that work there, and the price of the land, that physically is what that house is worth. the additional cost of it when you buy a house is just because somebody else was able to borrow nearly as much money as you could. Yeah, because the competition has always been, well, which of us can borrow the most money for that house? And whichever bank it was that decided to give you the money, well, right, that set what the price is. And the house isn't worth that in any realistic terms. That's just what people are prepared to pay. So once you get to the point that all of that paper becomes dead weight, probably through inflating it away, in truth, at that point, I mean, a house reverts to, what does it actually cost to build a house? And then it's a question of, well, can you afford it or not? There is a good argument, which there isn't a politician on the planet that's going to do it, but there is a good argument for banning banks making loans on the basis of how much they think you or I can afford, and forcing them to make loans based on the build cost of the house itself. So essentially you do away with all of that competition between borrowers. So if you like, at the moment, the bank is going to look at your income and your outgoings and sort of say, well, we think we can afford to lend you this amount of money. So that determines which house you can buy. There's a good argument for saying, well, no, do it on the basis of the house. So any one of us can go in and say, well, I'd like to buy a house. This is it. It costs £200,000. And the bank will say, yes, we've looked at it and we think it's worth 200,000. We're prepared to lend you 200,000, not 201,000. So nobody then,
which is what the builder wants you to do.
So I mean, if you do that, you remove
the. Where it comes from.
Yeah, I mean, everyone gets paid except the bank. I mean, the bank, because banks lend money out of thin air. Essentially, the bank wants you to borrow the maximum that they can get you to lend, because they're creating that as new money, which they're going to earn interest on. So obviously, they don't want you to buy a £200,000 house. They want you to go up market. What they want you to get a £500,000 one. Yeah, and that, of course, was what they were doing up until 2008 when it all went sour.
But that's because they started loaning to people they knew couldn't afford it.
Yeah, I mean, but that's inevitable. I mean, there's only so many people in the population who have the kind of good jobs that can pay the money back. My point with that is I still see it as the bank's fault. I mean, I don't remember us being able to march into a bank and hold them up at metaphorical gunpoint and demand that they lend us money. It was they that were bending over backwards to make us borrow the money. It's like, come inside, here, have a loan. Consolidate all of your debts into one repayment vehicle.
Or investors, perhaps, because when they allowed the Bank of England to loan, what was it, £10 to everyone they had instead of 5 or whatever it was. I can't remember the numbers exactly, but basically, if they had £1 in the bank, they could loan 10.
Yeah,
that's how it went. But once that had happened, then greedy investors wanted the 9% return.
Yeah, but I mean, in a way, that's what I'm saying. That greed, yes, there are greedy people out there, but the system itself would produce that anyway.
Well, if you suddenly got a lot more money than you once had, if you were only allowed previously to loan £5 on the strength of each pound you had in the bank, now you're suddenly allowed to loan £10. You've effectively got twice as much money to invest or to have invested, and therefore you need people to invest, and investors will.
I mean, the money is to be made. I mean, essentially, it's the bank shareholders are the big money winners. The bank senior employees who get bonuses and stuff for lending the money, they come next. But if you're the first recipient of the money, then you benefit from it because there's no inflation on it at that point. The further down that chain you are in terms of when you get the money, the more you're going to suffer from inflation as a result of it. So if you're an ordinary employee that's got to wait for that money to filter down through your employer before it gets to you, then by the time it gets to you, it's worth less. And in the meantime, because they've been buying stuff with it, it's driven all the prices up.
I find the hard bit really is because none, like yourself, towards the end of the life, really. So I'm getting to the point where we gradually are paying off those things that we loaned, and hopefully I am anyway. Hopefully you are. But what I wonder about is how the kids who are just coming out now are going to fare when really they just aren't earning enough to be able to buy properties in the first place. And secondly, they're coming out of universities with huge debts before they even begin. I mean, they're already slaves from the day they leave uni. I just wonder how the finance is going to work over the next 10, 20 years.
It can't, it doesn't, is the answer. The other problem in that is because the baby boom generation is so big as a part of the population. So I'm late baby boom, so I mean, kind of, I'm at the tail end of it. The early baby boomers are going to be in their 70s now, so they're starting to.
We really are past that end, really, aren't we, by the time we get there?
Well, the problem you've got with them is that generation. I mean, if you went back to the 50s and 60s, when that generation was becoming young adults, where suddenly they were wanting money to spend. I mean, a lot of the, pop culture and stuff emerged out of that generation growing up, because suddenly you had these people coming out of the post-war misery, and suddenly you had this big generation of people that had money to spend, and suddenly it was all prosperous. And we had the swinging 60s, 70s were a bit messy. But then in the 1980s, the same thing. We opened up this culture of borrowing and shove it all on the credit card. Let's all get rich on house prices. And now we're at the end of that. The problem now is the baby boomers are retiring, and in retirement, you tend not to borrow. As you say, I mean,
borrow with, have you? That's for starters. And secondly, hopefully you've paid off the big loan. The very big loan that most of us have is the house, isn't it? We buy a property, or if we can, we do. And you hope to have paid that off by the time you retire, because otherwise you've got no income to pay it off with.
I mean, the downside of that, again, acknowledging if money is created out of thin air when they make a loan, to the same tone, when somebody pays the money back, that destroys money. So you've now got this generation of baby boomers that are just paying everything off. So behind them, you're then relying on the next generation to actually borrow more money into existence than the baby boomers borrowed. And the problem is,
they charge them for a university fee, I guess.
Well, I mean, the problem is that there aren't enough of them to borrow that kind of money into existence. So, I mean, what the banks have done is find new ways of lending money to people. I'm sure they'd love to do something like privatize the NHS so that they can make us all borrow money to pay for our operations. But they've done. I mean, the next big thing, which they've got a big bubble in the US over, is car loans. Because a car used to be the second biggest thing that you'd spend on. Education, again, I mean, bringing in student loans, that's creating debt into the system, so that's bringing new money in. But as you say, the problem then is you've got this generation of people who are so encumbered with debt that they're ending up having to live with their parents into their 40s. And most of their early working life, when our generation would have been saving for a mortgage, all of the spare money they've got is going to pay off the debt that they ran into to go to college. So the problem then is that they're hitting.
You still haven't got the money to buy a house with. Often.
Yeah, so I mean, you need all of these government schemes like Help to Buy, or kind of whatever they call it this time around, where government has to underwrite somebody's deposit just to get people onto the housing ladder. I guess the point is that it isn't sustainable. It cannot go on. I mean, the only question is about how it unwinds eventually, but everyone knows it can't go on. I mean, it's being propped up to the tone of trillions of dollars, pounds, yens, with central banks printing money out of thin air to keep pumping into the banks to try to keep them solvent. And in the meantime, collectively, we are walking away. So essentially, people are spending far more of their income now paying off existing debt than they are taking out new debt. And I mean, this is why the economy has been stuck in such a rut since 2008. is because the idea of quantitative easing was, we'll give the banks a shed load of money, then they'll lend it to people. Well, the banks can only lend it to us if we're prepared to borrow it. And yeah, sure, there are still people borrowing money, and but the point is that in numbers, the number of us that are paying money back is greater than the number that are borrowing new money into existence. So we're actually destroying money as we go along. So you end up with less money in the system at each turn, and we will continue to do that.
I can only hope so, because that's the only way you're going to get a sustainable planet back, is if we stop over borrowing and we start to be more conscientious about what we spend our money on. And why are we working our fingers to the bone just to pay off a loan, which is...
Well, I think once you realise that the story that we were told no longer works, so if like the story I was told when I was younger was, you work hard, get through school, pass your exams, go to university, get a degree, and that's it, you'll get a job for life. And you'll be able to have the house, the car, and all of the rest of the stuff that goes with it.
In the family life.
Yeah, I mean, when I was young, that was true. Yeah, I mean, if you graduated from university in the year I did, the only way you were out of work after you graduated was because you wanted to be. Yeah, I mean, there was no problems getting jobs at that point. Now, I mean, when I went through university, it was only 10% of the population went to university. Now it's 50%, and there are no more graduate jobs. All they've done is kind of inflated everything away there. But you've now got people that are spending a fortune to go through university, ending up flipping burgers in Burger King. And they're struggling just to pay that debt off, let alone being able to get all of the trappings that we were supposed to have. So the problem is the story doesn't work, the incentive isn't there.
And I don't know, that's certainly not going to work in the current times. You have to. You really have no choice but to learn to invest your money much more carefully. And if you can invest it in a business, I think that's probably still, even today, going to be the best place to put your money. But because that's about learning how to generate wealth, and I think that's something that we really still need, but that wealth might have to come from a different source. Maybe it's coming from the renewable type industries. Maybe it's coming from the, how can we join the technology together and create food on less? And
I think the downside, I mean, this is what I'm working on at the moment because it's quite complicated. So there is a relationship between the nominal value of the currency that we use and the actual value generated by the energy that we use. This goes back to what I was saying, that if you produce debt-based money on which you've got to pay interest, then you have to have growth to pay it back. In order to have growth, you have to take the primary resources that are just what's on the planet naturally, and you have to make them into things. And in order to make things, you've got to use energy. Now, the problem is that the value that our energy generates has been going down quite dramatically in the last 40 years.
You're talking about the fact that it costs more to collect it.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, if you go back to the 1850s, 1860s, you drove a pipe into the ground 60 feet down and you got oil out. And now I mean, they're messing around in the Arctic, you do fracking, you do tar sands, where you've got this massive volume of energy has to go in just to get the energy. There's a calculation, there's a group of engineers in America called the Hills Group. Now, their analysis, what they're saying is the value that you got from a barrel of oil back in 1970 was about $49,000 in today's dollars. The value of the same barrel of oil, I think it was 2012, they did their analysis, was down to about $6,000.
6,000.
Yeah, and that's because you're now having to put what it would have been the other $43,000 worth into getting the energy to begin with. So it's essentially, as a society, as an economy, we're spending more and more in energy terms to get energy back.
How does that work with how does that work with the renewals, the solar panels and the wind farms? How does that work? Does that work the same?
Well, they're problematic because you have to put a hell of a lot of energy up front, and then you get it back very slowly over the course of about 10, 20 years. So it's okay now because we've still got lots of coal, oil, and gas, so we still have enough energy to deploy renewables. If we were in a position where we didn't have any spare oil, gas, and coal, then renewables would be a non-starter because there's just no way we'd have the energy to build them. Because what they return immediately, if you like, I mean, it's not like oil where as soon as you get the barrel out of the ground, more or less, there's energy there. With a wind turbine or a solar panel, you've put a lot of energy in up front, but it's going to trickle back over years. So it's almost a different kind of equation going on there. The problem with it is nobody's exactly sure sort of how energy productive renewables are.
Over what period of time they will last before they stop working, you mean?
Well, and how much energy you get back compared to what goes in. So, I mean, at the most optimistic, with solar panels and wind turbines, you get a return of about 20 to 1. On the most pessimistic, it could be as low as 2 to 1. And the problem is nobody knows, because that's such a complex calculation. As you're sort of having to think of all of the machinery that was involved in mining the raw materials, all of the energy that went into sort of actually turning or converting the raw materials into goods, all of the transport costs, all of the fitting costs. It's nigh on impossible to calculate that back. There is a piece of research by a guy called Charles Hall and David Murphy, who are ecologists in the States. They looked at one of the big Spanish solar collector farms and did a full analysis on the energy going in to what it produced. They came up with 2.5 to 1, which is a problem because that more or less.
But I guess it depends on how long that carries on for, because I guess it depends how long the piece of equipment finally lasts.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if that
2.5 to 1 in the first year, or 2.5 to 1 over 5 years, or that 2.5 over 10 years.
It's over the projected lifetime, which I think was 20 years.
Right.
Now, yeah, obviously it could be that they managed to eke that farm out for another 10 years more than it was intended for, in which case the ratio would go up. But again, I mean, the problem is that all of the upfront energy cost had to go in to begin with. So again, it's why it's crucial at this point where we still have oil, gas and coal, that we use the energy that we've currently got to put these energy technologies in place. As if we get to the point where there's not enough oil, gas and coal to go round and the price goes through the roof, then we're not going to be able to deploy renewables. Because we're not going to be able to afford the raw materials, we're not going to be able to afford the transport costs, and we're not going to be able to afford the cost of deploying them. At the moment we can. Because government is kind of doing business as usual stuff, so we're going to extend Heathrow. So there's every chance that we'll have a nice redundant runway, because I think we're probably close to peak air travel now. They're investing in roads just at the point where OPEC has just agreed their deal to put prices up. So just at the point where a few more of us will be no longer driving, we're going to have some nice uncongested roads. So if government leaves it long enough, I suspect that the roads will become decongested all on their own.
Quite possible. We could use it for other sorts of transport, I suppose. Go back to horse drawn.
Well, yes. I mean, I think, and I haven't got the figures for this, but it looks like there's a upswing in cycling at the moment, and that may be more than just cycling for pleasure. So we may be starting to see people using bicycling and walking far more than using cars. I'm not sure how we do with public transport. So there are problems with things like Southern Rail. So I suspect sitting in a traffic jam and paying a fortune for petrol is marginally better than catching the train in the southeast of England. But yeah, I mean, all of those things, I think, as the price of petrol goes up, so I think people will be obliged to make those kind of choices. That said, I mean, the general trend in oil prices looks like it's going to be down. It's basically because we're not going to be able to afford the kind of price that you would need to get any further oil out of the ground.
So you're suggesting that they're just going to use what we already have?
No, because it's uneven. So I mean, essentially, there will still be countries and oil fields producing oil, and there will still be people within countries that are rich enough to buy it. The problem with all of this is the difficulty comes at the margins. So essentially, enough of us will stop using enough oil that the price will go down in response to initially prices going up.
Like food.
Yeah, so you get a kind of zigzag pattern with the prices if you looked at them on a graph, which we've been seeing.
We're more careful with it.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this to a degree with oil prices since about 2005.
Somebody suggested to me the other day that perhaps we don't need oil as much as we once did, that cars are more efficient, that people are finding other ways of doing things, that we're using more home living, albeit that technology uses fuel to create it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with that is that's part of what's called the energy death spiral. So essentially, in order to get the big oil companies to carry on drilling oil fields that are expensive to drill, enough of us have got to be buying enough of their oil at that price to make it worth their while. I mean, this is what's been happening in the North Sea for the last couple of years. The companies have been selling up and going bust in droves. We now have a crisis in the North Sea that's looming of who's going to pay to decommission. Because basically there are fields in the North Sea now that are just being closed early. But, you know, there's still oil there, but nobody can be bothered at the price that it's coming out of the ground to go and get it. So you've got this rolling back now and scaling back of the oil industry. I mean, BP, I think, came out recently and said they no longer consider themselves to be an oil company. They consider themselves to be a gas company. So essentially what they're saying is, well, we're not going to, at this price, we're not going to go and explore for new oil. We're certainly not going to go and drill it. You know, yes, we'll keep pumping the stuff that we've already done. And as that gets into shorter supply, the price will go up. And if it goes high enough up, we may reconsider. I think the problem going back to energy in, energy out, if you imagine that society has a set amount of energy, and there's only so much energy in a barrel of oil. Now, there's a thermodynamic cost that accounts for about a third of it, which is basically that whatever you do with it, some of it is going to be wasted as heat, some of it's going to be pollution, and we can't avoid that. So, okay, we can narrow that as best we can by getting efficient cars and kind of using a bit of fuel economy. But okay, some wastage is there. So then what's left? At the moment, there's more of that energy in the barrel of oil going into society than there is to going to get the next barrel of oil. Right? So all of the other stuff that we do in the economy that isn't oil-based, you know, that's all enabled by that proportion of the barrel that we can get. The problem has been that the bit needed to get the oil has been going up, and that's squashing our bit. So we have less and less energy to do all of the things that we want to do.
Yeah, including building renewable.
Yeah, what it means, what it translates into is we can't pay back the debt because we don't have enough energy to do all of the economically productive things that would allow us to do it. So the money that we've got, where it crosses over with the money is we find ourselves paying a greater proportion of our collective incomes to paying off debt. And once we've done that, we find ourselves paying far more of a proportion of our money into energy of all kinds of food, heating, running cars if you're running one. Essentially, that cost takes up more and more as a proportion of our income. So we end up with less and less money to do all of the non-essential things that we a few years ago would have taken for granted. As I say, it's not like a thwomp all overnight. It's essentially that you think, well, yeah, actually, I'm going to leave the car at home and I'm going to walk to the shops. Or, yes, when I go and visit my friends or when I go to the pub, I'm not going to drive, I'm going to walk. I'm not going to go to the cinema this week. I'm going to cut it down to once every fortnight. Actually, I'm going to make the television that I've got last another year before I replace it. Yeah, I mean, they're all logical things that somebody whose income is getting squeezed is going to do. The problem is,
most of us, I would think, we're all in that position, really.
Yeah, so collectively across the economy, the total result of all of us doing those things is that companies that do stuff become unprofitable. The cinema discovers that it can't make a profit anymore because enough people have decided to cut back on the number of times they go that suddenly their profit margin has gone. The rest of
very expensive at the moment. If you want to go, it's a hugely expensive night out.
Yeah, I mean, anything like that we can do without. I mean, they're nice things to do, but they're not essential. Any business that's involved in those kind of areas is at most risk. Because essentially, the more we're spending on essentials and paying the debt we've already got, the less there is for them to get paid. Sooner or later, they're just going to go bust. So that's how that proportion of the economy that we're in, that's how that shrinks. Now, I don't think there will ever be a point. I think you could probably count on one hand the number of economists on the planet who understand this link between energy and money.
Very few, I would think. Anyway, Tim, we're getting around to that time of day now when I'm personally going to have to go off and carry on.
Right.
It feels like night time, doesn't it, when it's dark outside and it feels like it's time to go to bed. But actually, it is only halfway through the afternoon. I've still got to get some work done.
It is night time. It's only another 2 weeks and the nights will be getting longer again, or the days will be getting.
Can't wait.
Just over a fortnight to the solstice. So there's something for us to look forward to.
Yes, absolutely. And looking at ways we can, create energy for ourselves, I think it's still got to be pretty critical to each of us. We really need to work out how we're going to heat our homes, feed ourselves, do the things we need to do, keep some light on and achieve what we want and need, and perhaps sharing it with others and ways in which we can do that.
There's a book I'd recommend. It's not one of mine. This American guy called Chris Martinson. Chris Martinson. His book is called Prosper. And he goes through all of the ways that we can make ourselves more resilient. So if anyone's looking to get that, there's a link to it on my website, on the Consciousness of Sheep. Otherwise, if you go on Amazon and Google prosperity, his book will be in there. But I'd recommend it. It's well worth the read.
Good. Thank you much. I'll have a look at that. Always interested in any of the bits of information people put out there on being more self-resilient.
Right.
We will catch up with you in a fortnight's time.
Okay.
In the meantime, good afternoon, everybody, and hope you enjoyed the day.